unfold, preparing his entrance, and the stars shall applaud him with thunders of praise, and the light in his eyes shall enchant those awaiting. Yeah, then we shall behold him, then face to face. We shall behold him. Yes, we shall behold him face to face in all of his glory. Yes, we shall behold him. Yes, we shall behold him face to face. Our Savior and our Lord. Angels shall sound the shout of his coming, and the sleeping shall rise with thundering blaze. Then those who remain shall be changed in one moment, one moment. Then we shall behold him, then face to face. Yes, we shall behold him. Yes, we shall behold him face to face in all of his glory. Yes, we shall behold him. Yes, we shall behold him face to face. His glory. Yes, we shall behold Him. Yes, we shall behold Him face to face. Our Savior and Lord. Yes, we shall behold Him. Our Savior and Lord. Our Savior and Lord.
How much would you give me for this cup of cold water? After that worship time, maybe you'd all say, I'd give you $10. Really, how much would you give for a cup of water? Most of you probably say, about 2 cents, which is what it's worth, about 2 cents. So why did Jesus make such a big deal about it? He did, you know. He said, if anyone gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones who is my disciple, and you could put it on there, truly, I tell you, that person will certainly not lose his reward. Now, did Jesus mean that? Did he really mean that an act so inconsequential as a cup of cold water would receive eternal rewards? And if he meant that, why did he say it? What was he talking about? You know, though we seldom think about it, at least in this part of the world, the reality is that water is the most basic element of life. Water, in a very real sense, is life. The human body is made up of 60% water. Our brains are 70% water. Our blood is more than 80% water. Our lungs are 90% water, and we hardly give a second thought to water. In fact, some of us, I hope it's not true of any of you, but some of us perhaps this morning went and blew our nose and dropped a single Kleenex in the toilet and flushed it down to the sewers using more water than 800 million people have access to in an entire week. Did you know that the lack of clean water is actually responsible for more deaths in the world than war? Since I began speaking, 6 children under the ages of 5 have died somewhere in the world this morning in the last couple of minutes due to waterborne illnesses. That is the equivalent of 6 jumbo jets full of little children under 5 every single day for something that could be prevented with this. One of them who died recently was a 9-month-old daughter of a man who lives in a Central Asian country where we have workers, and she died from diarrhea and dehydration. People in that country believe that a child with diarrhea should not be given anything to drink so that the diarrhea will stop. And so that man and his family lost their child for lack of a cup of cold water. Our folks who are working in that particular part of the world are there doing birth and life-saving skills and teaching some things so simple as clean water technology. The man and his family who lost their child never got the training in time, so that child never got the cup of cold water that would have saved her life. Another man, after having received the training, came up to our workers afterwards and with tears in his eyes said, "If I had had this training sooner, 3 of my children would not have died." You know, I have to wonder whether Jesus in his omniscience might have even had those little ones in mind when he said what he said in this passage. I want you to look with me this morning at what Jesus has to say to you and to me through this simple yet very profound statement found in Matthew chapter 10, just the last few verses, and I'm going to read them again for you this morning. Matthew chapter 10, beginning to read at verse 40. If we had had the time, you could have seen the entire chapter leading up to these final verses as Jesus talking about sending his men out to the nations with the gospel and how they would be received. And as we saw in the verses 34 through 39, there would be a lot of people who would resist them. But then he concludes his words by saying this, "Whoever receives you," verse 40, "receives me. And whoever receives me receives him who sent me. The one who receives a prophet because he's a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. The one who receives a righteous person because he's a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. And whoever gives one of these little ones even a cup of cold water because he's a disciple, truly I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward." A while back, I received this note from a friend of ours who has supported our ministry for many years, supported it financially, and he wrote and he said this. He said, "I pray regularly that God would use me in a capacity like yours, and I long for the day," he said, "I long for the day when I would be free from what I do now to engage in real ministry." Now, while I understand my friend's desire to be greatly used of God, I have to say that it troubles me that somehow we have communicated to a man who spends 50 hours every week rubbing shoulders one-on-one with unbelievers, that somehow he is not in real ministry, while I, who spend my week rubbing shoulders with people like you, mostly believers. I work with believers. I visit believers on weekends. I travel overseas to minister to our missionary family, that somehow I'm in ministry and he's not. If what Jesus says is true, when he says, "I didn't come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance," which of the two of us is really in more real ministry? What would Jesus say to people like my friend and to people like you about the significance of the role you play in his kingdom? You know, there are two very simple truths that I'd like to share with you this morning from this passage that I believe have escaped the attention of millions of us as followers of Jesus Christ, thus keeping us in many ways on the sidelines rather than being in the game. And the first one is simply this: you have what they need. You have what they need. If you are a follower of Jesus who loves God and loves people, you already have what is needed to engage in real, significant ministry. Jesus said you do not have to be the preacher to get a preacher's reward. You do not have to quit your job and become a traveling evangelist to get a righteous man's reward. You do not need a seminary degree to make a difference. You do not need to write a theology of missions in order to be able to make a disciple. Listen, you do not have to preach like Andy Stanley or like Tony Hart in order to receive a reward. In order to have significant ministry, you do not have to exchange the cup of cold water that is in your hand for the cup of communion that is in your pastor's hand in order for you to be involved in real significant ministry. God put this cup in your hand for a reason. When Jesus says, look at the verse again, even a cup of cold water given to a single one of these little ones will be rewarded. He was not raising the bar on significant ministry. He was putting it right down there where every one of us could reach it. And just in case people didn't believe him, notice how emphatic he is. Look at some of the emphatic words in here. Go to the next slide. He says, if anyone gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones, truly, I tell you, that person will certainly not lose his reward. Very emphatic. So listen up. Even a cup of water is a gateway to valid ministry. Meeting the simplest physical need of the least one on earth counts. It is significant. It is eternally valuable. So, if God can use a cup of water, certainly He can use the tool that He has put in your hand. He can use the passion that He has put on your heart. He can use the occupation that He has put on your resume to bless the nations. Yet somehow we have convinced you that what you do every day is not real ministry. That what we do, people like me do on Sunday morning is, and what you do tomorrow morning isn't. And that is wrong. Some of you may recognize the name David Green. He's the founder of Hobby Lobby, a company here in the U.S. that has about 500 stores nationwide, $2.5 billion in annual sales. He tells a story of his journey to discovering his God-given significance. He was the son of a pastor. He had 5 other siblings, and they all learned their work ethic by picking cotton to help the family out. Well, in high school, through a class that involved practical experience in a local 5 and dime store, Green discovered his love for retail. He realized that he loved retail, and he said, all 5 of my siblings followed my father's footsteps and went into a traditional pastoral life. After I went into retail, I thought I was a second-class citizen. He said, it took me years before I understood that God had a purpose for me to fulfill. Do you remember what the Apostle Paul called politicians? Not what some of us want to call them today. Put up the next slide. This is what he called them. He said, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for the one in authority is what? God's servant. For your good. They are what? God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are what? God's servants who give their what? Full time to governing. Did you get that? Paul calls politicians full-time servants of God. Now, if he calls politicians that, what do you think you are? You are full-time servants of God. You are called to full-time ministry. It's high time we stop denigrating the high calling of serving God with whatever He has put in our hands. So what do you have in your hand that could bless the nations? Let me just share with you 3 things that I think most of us have in our hands with which we could bless the nations. I've already mentioned one. We have clean water. The leading cause of illness and death worldwide is contaminated water from poor sanitation. 800 million people have absolutely no access to clean water. 1.1 billion people still practice open defecation. No sanitary services at all. They just do it out there on the ground. 2.5 billion people, nearly 40% of the population of the world, lack access to adequate sanitation. So, nearly 10,000 people every day die for lack of a cup of clean water. Some of you could perhaps do something about that. Your 2 cents worth could literally change the world for some family on the other side of the world. And I'm not talking simply about making a donation to the World Health Organization. Why should we, the church, give to secular NGOs the privilege of what Jesus gave us to do? Only you, as a follower of Jesus, can give a cup of cold water in Jesus' name. Amen. You have water. God may be nudging one of you who has skills in healthcare or community development or sanitation or clean water solutions or other related fields to go and work with the couple that I mentioned earlier in this Central Asian country to bring God's love to life through something as simple as helping them get a little clean water. You have water. Secondly, you have English. Listen to me. Truly, truly, I say to you, it is no happenstance that you happen to speak the language that the whole world wants to speak. You have an incredible ESL ministry going on here in this church. If you weren't here yesterday to hear the passion of these men and women who are doing it, you need to sit down and talk to them. You can reach the nations right here through English. But you know what? All of the nations aren't going to come right here. There are between 2.5 billion and 2.9 billion people in the world today who live out there who will never hear the gospel unless you take it to them. And one of the ways you can take it to them is through English. One of the most amazing open doors that we have today all over the world is to send English teachers to the nations. One of those, just one of them that we have in Crossworld is in a Pacific Rim nation, a very thriving Pacific Rim nation, that has asked us specifically, Crossworld, if we could send them up to 1,000 English teachers. They said, we visited them a couple of years ago in April. They said, could you send us 100 by September? And we looked at them and said, this September? They said, yeah. You know how many we've sent them? 6. We could send them 100 right now. And they are paid positions in public schools, and they have told us that we can use the Bible as one of our tools for teaching English in the public school systems. What's more, this country is 96% Muslim, Buddhist, or atheist, and only 0.5% Christian. And you know who's taking these jobs? College students from America who want to go and have fun, experience the world. They go, they take a job teaching English because they get paid for it. They get paid a salary. They get housing provided. They go out and party all night. They come back in the morning kind of overhung, and they hang in there for a couple months, and they quit, and they leave the public school high and dry without a teacher. And so the public school has come to us and said, could you send us some good people? Do you know, if we don't seize an opportunity like that, we are missing it. We are missing what Jesus said we could do with a cup of cold water, with something so simple as the words on our tongues. The third thing that we have is that they need is jobs. Jim Clifton, the chairman of Gallup, recently authored a book entitled The Coming Jobs War, The Coming Job Wars. It was a result of a decade-long study of global needs. And listen to what he says. He's the chairman of Gallup. He said, 6 years into our global data collection effort, we may have already found the single most searing, clarifying, helpful, world-altering fact. Folks, that's a truly, truly, I say to you statement. Okay? He said, we may have already found the single most searing, clarifying, helpful, world-altering fact. What the whole world wants is a good job. Then listen to what he says. This is one of the most important discoveries Gallup has ever made. At the very least, it needs to be considered in every policy, every law, and every social initiative. All leaders, policymakers, lawmakers, presidents, prime ministers, parents, judges, priests, pastors, imams, teachers, managers, and CEOs need to consider it every day in everything they do. That is as simple and as straightforward an explanation of the data as I can give. Whether you are walking down the street in Khartoum, Cairo, Berlin, Lima, Los Angeles, Baghdad, or Istanbul, you would discover that the single most dominant thought on most people's minds is having a good job. We are so serious about sending godly entrepreneurs. And you're not all entrepreneurs, but maybe there's one entrepreneur in this congregation, I don't know, that know how to start businesses that create wealth, that provide jobs. We are so serious about sending those kind of people that we have actually partnered with a like-minded business development company to send business entrepreneurs cross-culturally to do using business what traditional missionaries do to make disciples, taking their business as a means of making disciples among the nations. Maybe you have someone in this congregation like that, and you ought to be saying at this missions conference, maybe he ought to be, maybe she ought to be the next one we send from this congregation. But you don't have to be an entrepreneur. Others of you have jobs that are transportable. In other words, you work for companies that have operations all over the world. And maybe you need to consider going to the vice president of global operations and saying, next time there's an opportunity for a transfer to Khartoum, or to Delhi, or to Istanbul, I'd like to put my name in for that. Listen to what John Piper says in his book, Don't Waste Your Life. He says, for many of you, the move toward missions and deeds of mercy will not be a move away from your job, but with your work to another, more needy, less reached part of the world. Christians should seriously ask not only what their vocation is, but where it should be lived out. We should not assume that teachers and carpenters and computer programmers and managers and CPAs and doctors and pilots should do their work in America. You have jobs. Crossworld's dream is actually about sending disciple makers from all professions, not just my profession. Yes, mine included, but not just my profession. Sending disciple makers from all professions to bring God's love to life in the world's least reached marketplaces. And if you'd like to know more about that vision, down in the tables down there in the basement on the Crossworld table, you'll see some books called A Better Way, Making Disciples Wherever Life Happens. And I'd encourage you to grab a copy of that and understand more about what we're talking about. So you have what they need. You can put that up there on the screen. Don't complicate the gospel mandate. Ministry that counts is within the reach of who God has made you and what you already have in your hand. But why is that true? Why is it true that you already have what you need for valid ministry? Well, because of the second point, and that is that truth flows from good deeds. You have what they need. Truth flows from good deeds. Therefore, don't truncate the message. Don't cut the message in half. You can add that phrase. Don't separate the gospel. Don't separate the good news of the gospel from the good deeds of the gospel. We're infamous at doing that. We just go and give them the good news, but there's no good deeds. But truth flows from good deeds. People open their hearts when we love them. Not just when we give them a message, but when we give them our lives. The good news was never meant to be merely a propositional message. It was always meant to be an incarnational message. It is not something that we merely give. It is something that we live. And I do not mean by that the deeds of love are a substitute for the gospel. I mean that they are a catalyst for the gospel. You know what a catalyst is? Remember your chemistry days in high school? A catalyst is simply a substance that precipitates or accelerates an event or a reaction. That's what loving people does. Loving people precipitates and accelerates gospel events. It opens doors for the gospel. You know, Jesus actually weds proclamation with incarnation right here in these three verses that we read in Matthew chapter 10, and he does it using 5 parallel statements and one little Greek word. The little word that he uses is the word dekomai, which simply means to welcome or to receive. It's actually a word of hospitality. Look with me at the 5 welcome statements. Number 1, he says, "He who welcomes you welcomes me." Why? Well, because a disciple is like the master, so if he welcomes you, he's welcoming me. Second statement, "He who welcomes me welcomes my Father." Why? Well, because I and the Father are one. If they welcome me, they're welcoming my Father. Third statement, "He who welcomes a prophet will get the reward of a prophet." Same reason. Fourth statement, "He who welcomes a righteous man will get the reward of a righteous man." But the fifth statement is different. It doesn't say he who welcomes or receives. It says he who gives a cup of cold water will certainly not lose his reward. What is the relationship between welcoming someone into your home and giving a cup of cold water? Well, it's really one and the same thing, isn't it? That's what you do, especially in an Eastern culture. That's what you do when you receive someone into your home. You give them water to wash their feet, to quench their thirst. It was the most basic act of hospitality in that culture. Here's one of the most powerful and forgotten gateways to ministry that exists today. And it's a dying breed in America. It's called hospitality. You ever heard of that word? Hospitality. And in the West, it is quickly disappearing. In Middle Eastern culture, hospitality is the epitome of what it means to practice good deeds. In fact, it is such a powerful and binding expression of goodness that to this day, if a Middle Easterner welcomes you under the shelter of his roof, he is obliged to protect you from anyone who would try to do you harm. And Jesus actually puts it in the same category as the ministry of prophets and righteous men. Why? Because truth flows from good deeds. People's hearts open to love, and hospitality is one of the purest forms of love. In Timothy and in Titus, Paul makes it a requirement for all church leaders. And in Romans chapter 12, he urges all believers, put that one on there, to pursue hospitality. That word pursue hospitality. Hospitality is the word philoxenia. And we might recognize philos means friend or loved one, and xenos, we know what xenophobia is. It's fear of strangers. Xenos is a stranger or foreigner. So what is hospitality? It is a love of foreigners. That's what hospitality is. By definition, it is to love or befriend a foreigner. We don't have an opportunity to do that in this country, do we? We are full of foreigners. We have the ideal opportunity to practice philoxenia, to practice hospitality. I was boarding a flight from New York to Kansas City 2 years ago. It'll be 2 years ago now in August. And I sat next to a 20-something-year-old guy who appeared to be from India. I sat down to him, I introduced myself, said, "Hi, I'm Dale." And then I asked him a question. I said, "Are you headed home or away from home?" He says, "Hello, sir, this is my first day in America." And I said, "Well, welcome to America." And Ramesh and I struck up a conversation, and for the next 2 hours until we got to Kansas City, we just talked. We talked about his home, about our home, and about why he was coming to America. He was coming as a graduate student at UMKC, University of Missouri in Kansas City, to do his graduate studies in electronics. And before we landed, I said, "Hey, Ramesh, my wife and I would love to introduce you to American culture. You want to exchange contact information, and we'll get together with you?" He said, "Oh, sure, I'd love that." And so we exchanged information, and that was the beginning of an incredible relationship that we've had, not just with Ramesh, but with a bunch of his friends. He has since moved out here to New Jersey. We're going to see him on Friday. But let me tell you, we have done so much with them. We've had them in for every major holiday and use it as a great opportunity to just share with them what the real significance of these holidays. We'll say, this is what how most Americans understand Christmas. This is how a follower of Jesus understands it. This is how most Americans understand Easter. This is how a follower of Jesus understands it. This is what Thanksgiving means to most Americans. This is what Thanksgiving means to a follower of Jesus. And I mean, we've had them in for meals. We've gone out and taught them how to play Frisbee golf. We've gone to baseball games with them, hockey games with them. They've invited us over, made us Indian food. They've come into our home, made us Indian meals. One of the simple, memorable evenings we had right near the beginning was when the movie was coming out of the theaters into video, the movie $1 Million Arm. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a Disney movie. It's a great little movie. It's a true story about some American baseball scouts who went to India to scout amongst cricket players for professional league pitchers for America. And so it was coming into video, and I called Ramesh up one day, and I said, "Hey, Ramesh, I don't know if you've heard of this movie, $1 Million Arm, but if you want to understand American culture, you need to understand baseball. And this is a great movie about baseball in India. Why don't you come over, and we'll make some pizza, and we'll watch the movie." So he comes with all of his friends over. There was 5 of them that night. I go to pick him up in my Hyundai Sonata, and so there's 4 guys packed in the back seat, and I say, "I'm sorry, guys, that you got to squeeze so tight." And they go, "Oh, no, we put many more people in cars in India." So they come over, and we have a great time with them. And we're driving home that evening, and I asked them a question. I said, "Guys, what's the most difficult thing for you about life in America?" They did not even have to take a breath. They immediately said, "We have few friends and no way to get anywhere." I could have cried. Here God is sending us 1 million. There's 1 million of these guys in our schools every year. He is sending us countless numbers of these people who are hungry for friendship. Unlike many of our contemporaries who are too busy for us, these guys are hungry for friendship. And 80% of them will never see the inside of an American's home the entire time they're here in America. If that isn't an opportunity to practice what God told us to practice, hospitality, I don't know what is. And yet today, to our shame, we are tragically becoming one of the least hospitable countries in the world. And you know what I'm talking about. Now, yeah, we got to be careful who we let in. We got to screen people properly. But you know what? The answer to the threat of Islamic terrorism in America is not to slam the door shut on them. I'll tell you what the answer is. It is for every follower of Jesus to make one Muslim friend. And there's way more of us than them in this country. Do you know what would happen if you just made a friend with one Muslim, and we all did that for the Muslims in this country? Number one, it would change how they look at Americans. And it does. I mean, these Indian friends, they said, We have a totally different view of what a Christian is than we had before, and what an American is because of our relationship with you. The other thing it does is it changes your attitude towards them. I mean, I used to go into Dunkin' Donuts out here. Who runs Dunkin' Donuts out here in the East Coast? Indians. I'd go in there and think to myself, why do these guys have to own all of our stores? You know what I do now when I go in? I see them, I go, hey, where are you from? I got a friend from India, and I want to talk to them. Why? Because it changes the way you look at people when you practice hospitality. So why does any of this matter? Well, because there are millions of water boys and girls, that's you, who have been sitting on the sidelines because someone's told you you can't get in the game. You can pay, you can give us your money, and you can pray, but you can't play. And I'm here to tell you that you need to get in the game. Because there are billions of the least who have still never once heard the gospel. Because nobody who has a cup of clean water has gotten close enough to them to give it to them. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we just bow before you this morning. We thank you that you have entrusted to us such an incredible privilege as being your partner in the gospel. And I thank you that you have not made it so high and difficult that only the elite few are able to actually do it, but that you have made each one of us capable of it if we'll just take what you've given us. Father, I pray that there would be some men and women in this congregation who might look at what you've given them in a new way and consider where in the world you might want them to use that, and not just assume that it's here in the Philly area because that's where you happen to have them be born. I pray, Father, that you would bless the nations through what you've put in our hands. In Jesus' name.